If you clicked on this video, you're probably staring at an endless amount of work that feels impossible to get through in the time you have. Maybe you've got exams coming up and the syllabus feels never ending, or a project that's been hanging over you for months and you're nowhere near done. You keep telling yourself you will catch up, but the gap between where you are and where you need to be just keeps growing. You've tried studying longer, staying up later, sacrificing weekends, and it still doesn't feel like enough. I know that feeling. Back in med school, I had moments where an entire year's worth of content was sitting in front of me with weeks to go, and conventional studying wasn't going to cut it. That's what forced me to completely change how I approached work. Not just study harder, but figure out the actual science of how to compress time without sacrificing output. I'm Salim, I'm a medical doctor, a YouTuber, and I coach students and professionals. And in this video, I'll show you the 5 parts of what I call the compression framework. Stick around until the end because I'll show you exactly how I used this during med school to cover an entire year's worth of content in just weeks. So the first part of the compression framework is going to instantly make your workload feel a lot smaller. And I want to start with a question most students never think about. Why are you studying everything equally? You have a textbook with 400 pages and you treat every page like it matters the same. Every topic gets the same time, the same energy, the same effort. But here's what's actually happening in your brain when you do that. When you study in order of your classes or lectures, your brain has no framework to hang new information on. Every topic feels like starting from scratch. But when you start with the core foundational concepts first, something changes. Your brain builds a skeleton of the subject and everything else slots in faster. Less repetition is needed. You move through material at a noticeably quicker pace. I call this the yield cascade, and it's the first level of the compression framework. With this yield cascade, it's important to realize that in almost every subject, a small portion of material accounts for the vast majority of what gets tested. And this is in any field, documented across medicine, law, engineering, and beyond. And so what this means is that you actually have a lot less to study than you realize. And here's how to apply this. Before any revision block, spend 10 minutes on what I called a yield map. Go through your syllabus and mark topics as high, medium, or low yield based on past papers or your lecturer's emphasis. Then study strictly in that order. Back in med school, pharmacology had hundreds of drugs to learn. Instead of following lecture order, I identified the highest yield drug classes first and built my understanding from there. By the time I reached the less common drugs, I already understood the mechanisms, so each new one took a fraction of the time. So now that you know your approach to study, the next question is, how much time should you actually give yourself to study it? It's probably a lot less time than you think, and there's a psychological principle that explains exactly why. But it's only half the story, and the half most people miss is actually what's costing them the most time. But the first half is called the Parkinson's law, and it states that work expands to fill the time available for it. So if you give yourself 3 hours to cover a topic, your brain will find a way to fill 3 hours. Not because you need 3 hours, but because the deadline allows it. You'll reread the same paragraph, you'll reorganize your notes, you'll take slightly longer breaks, and at the end of it, you'll feel like you worked hard, but the output won't reflect that. So here's how to properly apply it. Compress your time targets aggressively. Instead of blocking 2 hours for a topic, block 45 minutes and treat it like a hard deadline. Your brain will prioritize faster and focus on what actually matters, just as you do when you cram an essay just before the deadline. It's simple in theory, but most students resist this because it feels uncomfortable, but that discomfort is actually the point. Now, for the second half I mentioned, research shows that switching between tasks, different subjects, your phone, a quick email, costs up to 40% of your productive study time. Not because of the distraction itself, but because every time you switch, your brain takes time to reload the previous context. It's called resumption lag, and it's happening every single session. So you have 2 forces working against you simultaneously: time that expands to fill your schedule and attention that fragments every time you switch focus. Together, they can turn 45 minutes of real work into a 2-hour session. So the fix for both is the same: 1 subject, 1 task, 1 compressed block. No switching and no open-ended time. When I was revising for finals, I stopped giving myself open-ended study blocks entirely. Every session had a fixed endpoint and a single focus. Material I used to spend a full day on, I was covering in a few hours because my brain had no choice but to move. And before the next point, if you ever feel like the day just disappears and you're not sure where the time went, that was me too. Even as a doctor, a productivity coach, and someone who has spent years studying how high performers use their time, I was still getting distracted, losing hours, and not making the progress I wanted on the things that actually mattered to me. So I built an app called Superhuman that showed me exactly what was eating my time, made me reflect on it honestly, and nudged me towards the goals I kept putting off. And it's what helps me manage working full-time as a doctor, running a YouTube channel, coaching, training, and still having a personal life. Superhuman builds a completely personalized productivity system around you specifically, your goals, your schedule, your distractions, your patterns. It gives you daily briefings, honest reflections, habit tracking, and high leverage tasks tasks chosen specifically for where you are in your journey. And this means that as you progress, the whole system evolves with you, getting more ambitious, more specific, and more tailored the longer you use it. If that sounds like something you need, the link to download Superhuman is in the description below. Thank you, and now back to the video. And that brings us to the next level, because even with compressed time and zero switching, most students are still operating at a fraction of their actual cognitive capacity, and fixing that is where the real speed gains come from. But what do I mean by a fraction of your actual cognitive capacity? So here's something to think about. If two students study the same material for the same amount of time, why does one retain 3 times more? It's not focus, it's not intelligence, it's not even how good their notes are. It comes down to one thing: the intensity at which their brain is actually working during that time. And this is what I call the intensity equation, which is the third level of the compression framework. The problem is, most students study passively. They reread notes, highlight textbooks, watch lecture recordings, and it feels productive because your eyes are moving and time is passing. But passive studying is one of the lowest intensity things your brain can do. And low intensity means poor retention, which means you have to go over the same material again and again. Every extra pass through the same material is time you didn't need to spend. High intensity studying, things like retrieval practice, solving problems without looking at notes, explaining concepts from memory, forces your brain to work harder in the moment. And what that means for speed is that high intensity studying helps material stick in 1 or 2 passes instead of 5 or 6. And fewer passes through the same content is directly fewer hours spent. And there's strong research behind this. Retrieval practice has been shown to improve long-term retention by up to 50% compared to passive rereading. So you're both learning better and faster. So to apply it to every study session, ask yourself one question before you start. Is what I'm about to do going to force my brain to work, or am I just going through the motions? This means taking a step back to replace highlighting with practice questions, replace watching a lecture with pausing every 10 minutes and writing down everything you just learned from memory. In med school, I stopped rereading entirely in my final year. Every session was either practice questions, teaching concepts to myself, or writing out mechanisms from scratch. The same volume of material that used to take me a week to feel confident with, I was getting through in a day, because each session was doing more work per hour. And this leads directly into the next level, because even if your intensity is high, most students are unknowingly sabotaging themselves before a single session even starts, and it's costing them more time than almost anything else on this list. So what is it that's sabotaging students before a session even starts? It's something I call the activation energy problem, and once you see it, you'll notice it every single time you sit down to study. And here's what it looks like. You sit down at your desk, spend a few minutes deciding what to study, reorganize your notes, check your phone quickly, or get a drink, and before you know it, 20 minutes have passed and you haven't done a single thing. That's not laziness, that's activation energy, the mental cost of getting your brain from a resting state into a focused one. There are 3 things you can do to fix it, but first, let's talk about why it matters so much for speed. That 20-minute warm-up might feel harmless, but study twice a day for a month and you've just lost 20 hours before you've even started. That's days of revision gone to nothing. The solution isn't willpower. The brain naturally resists switching states, but if you remove the decision of what to do next, that resistance drops almost immediately. So the first thing you need is pre-commitment. The night before, decide exactly what you're studying, in what order and for how long, so that when you sit down, there's nothing to decide. Your brain can just start. The second is good environment design. Your brain associates environments with behaviors. Same desk, same setup, distractions removed before you sit down. And over time, your brain learns that sitting there means working. And the third is a start ritual, a short repeatable sequence that signals focus is coming. Making a coffee, putting headphones on, opening your notes, in that exact order every time. It sounds too simple, but it works because your brain stops treating it as a new decision. In med school, my ritual was the same every session. Same desk, earphones on, first question open before I sat down. Within days, it became automatic, and that 20-minute warm-up essentially disappeared. And that brings us to the final level of the compression framework, the one most students skip because it feels counterintuitive. But skipping it is exactly why so many students hit a wall halfway through cramming, and why the framework stops working without it. So what is it that feels counterintuitive, but is essential to the whole framework? It's strategic recovery, deliberate, structured recovery. And I know that's the last thing you want to hear when you're trying to compress months of work into weeks. But your brain isn't a machine. It runs on biological cycles, and ignoring them makes you slower. There's a concept called ultradian rhythms, natural cycles of roughly 90 minutes that govern how your brain alternates between high and low alertness. After about 60 to 90 minutes of genuine focus, cognitive performance drops. You reread the same sentence, attention drifts, simple things feel harder than they should. Most students respond by pushing through, but the work just gets slower even though you're trying harder. And this connects directly to speed, because poor recovery means material doesn't consolidate, so you have to restudy it. Good recovery means things stick first time. Going through your syllabus once instead of 3 times is where the real time savings come from. So here's how to apply it in 3 steps. First is to work in focused blocks of 60 to 90 minutes, followed by a genuine 10 to 15 minute break. No phone, no emails, no new input. The second is likely what you're compromising on, and it's sleep. This isn't optional. Sleep is when memory consolidation actually happens. Cutting sleep to study more is one of the most counterproductive things you can do. And finally, a daily shutdown point. A fixed time where your studying stops completely so your brain fully detaches before the next session. The students moving fastest worked intensely, then stopped completely. Short blocks, real breaks, and consistent sleep. And that brings me to how I used this framework in med school. One example was when I had a pharmacology exam covering an entire year's worth of drug classes, and I had 3 weeks to prepare. The first thing I did was making a yield map. I went through past papers and identified the drug classes that came up most consistently, and doing that felt like cutting my syllabus in half. Then I structured my sessions around compressed time blocks, 45 minutes per drug class, 1 class per block, and no task switching. Every session started the same way, desk cleared, earphones on, with my first set of practice questions open. And instead of rereading lecture notes, every session was active recall, writing out mechanisms from memory, checking gaps, or doing practice questions. I made sure to take proper breaks between blocks, protected my sleep, and had a shutdown time every evening. And once the exam came, I felt more prepared than most exams I've spent weeks and months studying for with my previous degrees before med school. This framework is going to help you finish more work in significantly less time, so you're not wasting hours at a desk when you don't need to be. But here's the thing, even with the right study method, most people are still losing hours every day to habits that they haven't even noticed. Habits that quietly drain mental clarity, focus, and energy. And until you fix them, any productivity system you use will have a ceiling. As a full-time doctor, YouTuber, and coach, I spent a long time identifying exactly which habits were costing me the most time and replacing them with ones that gave it back. And in this video here, I go through 12 simple habits that save me over 20 hours a week. So click the video to find out what they are.